quintessential, beautiful Weston, Vermont. But more specifically, we're in the Old Mill Museum here. And I'm going to ask my friend Al Rogers to give a background of himself and the mill. And then as we go on, we'll show you some of the machinery here. So Al, if you could help us.
Well, thanks, Dick. Again, I'm Al Rogers, and I am currently the president of the Weston Historical Society. And welcome to the Old Mill right here in Weston, Vermont. Built in 1780, was originally built as a lumber mill. And Dick, what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through and I'll highlight some of our pieces of our equipment that are here and show you what we're working on, how they work, sort of the time scales. And beginning with our lumber mill, it was 1780, and that was the original up and down saw right here.
There.
We've got it obviously in plastic to make it safe, but this up and down saw was operated by a water wheel located down underneath this deck through a series of pulleys. It was operated and was made to go up and down. You'll notice that with a lot of pieces of equipment that we have here, the names are basically capture their functionality. So an up and down saw. It was not very efficient. It would take about 15 minutes to go through a log about this length.
That long, yeah.
Yeah. So let's walk down. I'm going to point some things out, and then later on in our little tour, I've got some experts that are going to be staged throughout the mill to give you some further information. One of the other saws that we have that was used in the early 1800s, late 1700s, was this saw called a drag saw. Once again, the simplicity of the names, it was called a drag saw because they literally dragged it into the woods. And its purpose was to take trees that were felled and then be able to, in this section of the saw, cut them up into manageable lengths to bring them down here to the mill. When we have visitors here, one of the questions we get asked very much is our waterfall and the dam.
Gorgeous.
A lot of people, particularly the younger folks, think that the power in a mill comes from the waterfall over the dam. In fact, it does not. The purpose of the dam is to retain water behind it, creating what's called a mill pond. And then we can go ahead and tap the water in the mill pond, send it downhill a little bit, bring it into our mill, and create the power to run turbines and other pieces of equipment.
Ah, that's interesting.
A lot of wedding pictures taken there. All right, Dick, let's go inside and look at some of our other pieces of machinery that we have.
Okay, lead the way. I'm following.
You can see that we have an antique lathe that dates back to the early 1800s. And then we have this bandsaw that's right here. And what I'd like to point out about this is due to the date of it in the early 1800s when metal was very scarce, you can see that the wheel is 100% laminated wood.
Ah.
And although that was a lot more work and more labor intensive to put together, it was the economic alternative at the time.
And this is wood too. This is the base.
And probably the greatest attraction for our visitors when they come in when we're open is the grist mill here. And just a little bit of background on it. As you know, the Vermont Country Store was opened up in 1946 by Vrest and Mildred Orton. And interestingly, it was Vrest's father, Gardner Orton, who's pictured right there, who ran this grist mill from 1935 until 1960.
Oh, so there's a tie to the Vermont Country Store.
There is, and this is a completely workable system. And again, I've got some experts lined up later on during the tour to actually start this up for you, and we can demonstrate its capabilities.
That's great.
And as you walk out through the main opening, one of the wonderful exhibits that we have here is this wagon. It's a tinsmith's wagon. And it dates back to about 1857. And the fact is that there are only 4 of these in existence across the country. And it's been completely restored. The other thing that is a big attraction for our mill is that we actually have a master tinsmith who has a shop right down at the end of this hall.
We just passed the door here, yeah.
And his name is Dave Glaggett. He's been here for 28 years. And again, he is a master tinsmith. He has consulted with Winterthur, the Antiques Roadshow, the Ford Foundation. and that's his place of business. And he's actually a real character, so he's very interesting for visitors when they come in to see him. Well, Dick, what I wanted to follow up with you here is to give you what is very important to us here at the mill and how we treat our visitors and what we provide for them. And it's almost a mission of ours to provide them a 3 vantage point experience, one of sight, one of sound, and one of motion. And so what I've done is, as you can see, we have our tractor set up over here. I've got a couple of the experts in the mill that are ready to give you a much more detailed presentation of our machinery and how it works.
That's great. Let's go.
Okay.
I'm now at the shingle making machine, and I'd like to introduce 2 members of the Weston Historical Society board. One is Joel Kuhlberg and the other is Dave Peters, and they are going to explain the history of the machine, and they're going to operate it, and I'm going to say as little as I can, and I'm just going to get out of the picture. So Dave, if you will.
Thank you. Well, the mill initially was a up and down saw mill, and about 1900 it became a shingle mill, and this is our shingle making machine. Built by the Lane & Company, 1878. It was the ability to mass produce shingles. It's a great machine. Before a machine like this came along, if you wanted shingles on your home, you had to make them one at a time with a tool called a froe. Here's our froe and a mallet. The operator would take the froe, put it on the wood, roughly the thickness of the shingle, drive it in with the mallet, and then split the shingle off. Hence the term hand split shingles. This machine comes along, or one like it, and this could make a lot of shingles in a day. This machine actually in 1906 broke the world's record for shingle production. One man in a 10-hour workday could make 10,000 shingles. 10,000 shingles is roughly enough for 4 homes, average homes. The way the machine works, we're going to run it with a tractor today, and we start the tractor up, the blade will start spinning. As the blade is turning, we'll take and pull this lever over, which will then engage this carriage. The carriage and the block of wood will be fed through the blade of the saw, and we'll cut a thin piece of wood off, which is the shingle. As the carriage moves back, these 2 little wheels will ratchet over, and that will advance the block of wood out for the next shingle. But it will advance the top of the shingle wood further than the bottom. Hence, it will make a butt end of the shingle, the thicker end of the shingle. The next time it comes through, it'll advance the bottom further than the top. So it keeps staggering the block of wood to keep it relatively straight and makes the butt end of the shingles for us. We're going to start the tractor up now, and we'll see if we can make some shingles for you. This being a 1943 John Deere, we don't have a key to start this like you would start your normal car. We have to roll the flywheel over. A few things to do before is turn the gas on. And we'll choke it, make sure it's in neutral, and then we'll start it up.
I just want to make a little closing comment here. I had the pleasure of eating dinner at the Bryant House, which is right next door, right next to the Vermont Country Store. And I hope I get this right, but I had maple glazed, maple sugar salmon. And it was made on, and it was served on maple shingles made here. So these people from Weston are pretty ingenious. They have another market growing for these shingles. And now, Dave, if you could help us explain, or could you explain the grist mill to us?
Sure, we'll get downstairs and we're going to see the turbine, the machinery that powers the grist mill.
Okay, very good.
Here we are in the understory of the mill.
Dave, I understand that there was considerable damage here after Irene in 2011.
Yeah, 3 years ago we had Irene. Right where you're standing now, we actually had 6 feet of water here.
Up to here?
Up to here. Well, about 4 feet maybe. But we did have 6 feet of water over the dam.
That's amazing.
A lot of water. Well, let me show you how this thing works.
Okay.
We had a couple problems with the mill earlier than the flood. About 1900, the mill burned to the ground. It was rebuilt, and at that time they did not put the water wheel back in because that was antiquated. They put a modern-day turbine in. The turbine was actually built in 1865 over in Claremont, New Hampshire, produced about 80 horsepower. And this is what we use today to run all the machinery in our mill. As we said earlier, we had a little damage to the turbine and to the bottom of the mill. Being built in 1865, we use 1865 technology. The entire weight of the turbine, which is all cast iron, is supported by a bearing at the bottom of the shaft. Now, 1865, what's the bearing made of? Bearing's made of wood. So the bearing got worn out with all the silt and sediment in the water. We had to replace the bearing. So the mill rats came down here. We took the entire machine apart, crawled underneath it, got the old bearing out. Now the problem is finding a new piece of wood for the bearing. This was made of a piece of cherry. Cherry's a nice hardwood, but not really the ideal wood for a bearing. The ideal wood is something called lignum vitae. Grows in South America. Very heavy, dense wood, and it's a very oily wood, so it lubricates itself. The problem with lignum vitae, though, growing in South America, a lot of the rainforests have been cut down, the trees have been destroyed. So we had to find a piece that was available to us in the States. And fortunately, I found 2 pieces, one in Virginia and one in Grafton, Vermont, which is about 20 miles over the mountain. Went over there, picked up a piece of lignum vitae from the gentleman, and came home, and we had to then turn it or shape it into this shape. Fortunately, I do woodworking at home. I have an 1880s woodworking lathe. We mounted it in the lathe, spun it, turned it with cutting tools, and we have now running this turbine on our lignum vitae bearing. And hopefully this will last a lot longer than I do. So, the way the machine works, we have our mill pond, which supplies the water to our turbine. We have a steel pipe called a penstock, which brings water down to the turbine. In the mill room, we have a wheel on the floor that will turn, and that will open up a valve here, allows the water to flow through the turbine, spins the blades of the turbine. Once the fins or blades start turning, this gear will start turning. This gear turns, and then it turns a smaller gear. Now, if you notice, this gear is made of cast iron and it has wooden teeth in it, which do several things for us. One, it's much quieter. You don't hear the clanking of metal on metal. Secondly, the wooden teeth are the weak link in the system. If the machinery jams, a wooden tooth will snap off and everything comes to a halt. All we do then is take the old tooth out, and we do that by pulling the wedge out lift the broken tooth out, put a new tooth in, put the wedge back in, and we're back in business. 10 minutes. If this was a cast iron gear, we'd have to send to the big city to have a new gear cast. We could be down for months, and that means that our machinery is down. We cannot use anything. So, the last reason, this being a grist mill presently, if you have metal teeth hitting metal teeth, there's a chance there'll be a spark. And when you enter grist mill, there's a lot of fine dust and powder, and it could create an explosion. You don't want to do that. So, the gear is turning, the small gear is turning, the rear shaft turns. As the rear shaft turns, we go down here, and there are two pulleys on that back shaft. They both turn. When they turn, it makes this flat belt move, which then makes this gear turn. This pulley is a idler pulley, and that's where our power supply will stop until I take this lever and pull this lever over. When I pull the lever over, it slides this belt to the driven pulley. Then all the pulleys on the front shaft will turn, including a pulley on this end, which will make this flat belt turn. And this drives our mill room, our 2,000-pound millstones upstairs. As I said, this flat belt will be turning, which is then moving another pulley under our mill room. This large pulley turns. Right above this is our two millstones. The top millstone is 2,000 pounds, and that's what's going to be grinding our corn. We can raise and lower that top stone with this lever here, which is controlled in the mill room. That will bring the stones closer together, further apart. At the same time, we have a small belt under the large one, which is turning another set of pulleys. And this is making our grain elevator move. This is how we separate our product from the cracked corn and the cornmeal to two separate pieces. And we move it around with this. Okay guys, get the water going. The water is now flowing through the pipe, through the penstock. We're opening the gate valve right now. Gears are turning. I'm pulling the clutch over, which will now activate the millstones.
Well, now we're upstairs in the grist mill, and Dave has already shown you how the water power works, converts through gears and pulleys and so on to run the grist mill itself. And now Dave is going to show you how the corn is actually ground into cornmeal or corn flour.
Thank you, Dick. Give you a little history on the mill. It was brought here in 1935 and ran as an active business from 1935 till about 1960. The mill originally, though, came out of Chelsea, Vermont. The stones are much older than that. The stones came from France in 1820, and they were quarried in a burr mill north of Paris. We're very fortunate in that burr stones happen to be the ideal and the best stones to make millstones out of. Each of these stones weigh about 2,000 pounds, and they came over as ballast in sailing ships. Once the ships got to the States, they didn't need the ballast any longer. They brought product back to Europe. The captain would sell the stones and make some money doing that. These stones being 2,000 pounds apiece, they're never going to wear out, but they will wear. They get dull. If you've ever seen millstones on someone's front yard, they have grooves cut in them. And that pattern is what actually shears the grain, just like a pair of scissors would shear paper. So when they get dull, we have to dress the stone or sharpen the stones. The miller didn't normally do that himself. There'd be an expert that would come in, go from town to town, from mill to mill, and sharpen them. And he'd use tools like this. And this is called a pick. And we had these picked, about 7 years ago. And they were sharpened up then. To do that, we have to take the wooden housing off. Once the wooden housing is off, it exposes both stones. We then take the crane. We bring the crane over on top of the stone, lift up the calipers. There's a hole in each side of the top stone. The pin goes in each one of those holes. We then turn this wheel, and through the power of the screw, we can lift that 2,000-pound stone up. Once we get it high enough, we flip that stone over on the two pins to see the underside, to see where those lines or scoring is. We can then dress the stone. Now, we had these done, as I said, about 7 years ago. The gentleman came in, and he used the pick, picked our stones for us. 4 days of constant work to do that. Now, as you pick a stone, little pieces of hammerhead would break off. The metal work hardens, breaks off, and then flies through the air like shrapnel. Would get embedded in the stone dresser's arms and stay there. They'd heal over, become little black tattoos. So, Dick, if you come to my mill one day and say you want to dress my stones, I'm just going to say one thing to you. Show me your metal. And that's M-E-T-T-L-E. Show me your worth, show me what you're made of. And you're doing that by showing me the M-E-T-A-L that are in your arms. If your arms are clean like mine, you're not touching my stones, because you could ruin my stones forever. So that's the origin of an expression. It came out of the milling process. So we have our stones all sharp. We're ready to go. We have corn in the hopper. When this was a working mill, they did corn, wheat, rye, and barley, or combinations of those grains. We do corn. It's easily accessible for us. We have the corn in the hopper. We open a little door at the bottom of the hopper, allows the corn to flow out and come onto this piece of wood, which is called a shoe. The shoe can be raised and lowered to regulate how much corn or grain is going into the process. Once the corn gets into the eye of the stone, the top stone is called the runner, and that's going to be turning. The corn has gotten in there, it's gotten between the two stones, and those grooves will actually cut the corn, and then the weight of the stones will pulverize it. Centrifugal force will bring that grain to the outside of the wooden housing, and then it drops down an opening at the bottom of the housing into our grain elevator. And the grain elevator is right over here. It's little metal cups. These little cups are full of the raw product. As the elevator moves up, it drops the grain down the chute, goes on to our sifter. The sifter will separate our big particles, the cracked corn, from the cornmeal. And this is what we're trying to make, cornmeal. We can take this home now, make corn muffins, cornbread, Johnny cakes. The cracked corn, we can recycle that through the process to get more cornmeal, or in our case, we give it to the chickens, local chickens, and they seem to be very happy with it. We don't sell any product here. 1959, the federal government passed legislation which closed most small mills in the country for health reasons. Got critters running around here, especially in the fall, and just impossible to keep them out. So instead of going into a stainless steel environment, the mill was shut down at that time. So whatever we have is just given away to local farmers. Now, we're very fortunate in that we can regulate the height of the stones, the distance those stones are apart. The further apart they are, the coarser the product will be. The closer those stones are, the finer the product. Meal to flour. And that's controlled with this wheel right here on the floor. I turn this wheel, and I can lower or raise the 2,000-pound millstone. Very simple. When we give our demonstrations, we have 3-year-old little kids come in here, and they can raise and lower that stone. Power of the screw, once again. Very important. What else we got going? I think we're going to get this running. As it's running, I'm going to talk a little more, give you a few more expressions that you may have heard and the origin of those expressions. We have the stones turning. They're turning roughly 80 RPM. I'll get the corn flowing down. We got corn in the process. I'm going to lower the top stone. Now, when I lower that stone, you're going to hear the sound change. It gets a little deeper sound. We'll now be making a lot more cornmeal, a lot less of the cracked corn or big particles. What I'm going to do now is check the cornmeal. There's some fresh cornmeal. I want to see if it's the right consistency, to see if it's too fine or too coarse. I check with my hand. I'm using my thumb. Well, I think it's still a little too coarse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the stone a little bit, make it a little finer. I'll wait for the product to go through the cycle. I'll check the cornmeal again. Feel it. Feels pretty good. I think you'd be happy with this if you bought it. Well, this is called the rule of thumb. And that's where the expression came from. There's no dial on here to turn this to 14 to get the cornmeal. It's all done with the expertise of the miller. Now, we also have the separator here. Now, this is separating out our cornmeal from our cracked corn. Most mills did have a separator of some sort. Some mills didn't, though. So what you would do is you would buy this. Big particles, small particles, all mixed together. You would then bring this home and you'd have to separate it yourself. And this is called run-of-the-mill, average. And that's where that expression came from. Okay. Raise the stones. Now, I detect something. I stand over here and I can smell the corn. It just smells different. Now the miller, as he's doing this, his milling operation, he would do this frequently. He'd put his nose down by the stones. What he wants to do, he wants to smell the process, wants to smell the stones. He wants to make sure that the stones aren't so close together that he's burning his product. If he waited till the smell came over here, all that product is ruined, it's burned, no good. So what he's doing, he's keeping his nose to the grindstone. Another expression you probably heard, came out of the milling environment. Well, that's pretty much the process we have here. Now, Dick, what are you doing right now?
Well, besides just standing here, I'm watching the, as far as I know, the only water-powered grist mill in Vermont, converting corn to cornmeal and corn flour.
Yeah, well, you're doing that, but you're also milling around. And the mill was a place where folks would come, bring their grain to get it ground. They'd stand around on right where you are now, and they'd wait, and they'd get the latest gossip for the day. It was a social place to be. So that's where you are.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for this episode. I want to thank Al and the Weston Historical Society for showing us around the Mill Museum and some of the machinery. But we're closing here in front of one more building, which is right next to the Mill Museum. And Al, if you just as a last comment, give us a couple of comments about this other wonderful museum here in Weston.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Dick. This building is referred to as the Farrar Manser House. And it's named after the two families who had lived there and was originally built in 1795-97. And shortly after that, it was the Farrar family that purchased the lumber mill for their place of business.
Well, that's interesting. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to see you for our next episode.